Oh, I thought you were pointing at me.
You need an updated copy of the script?
I call to order the 8 May 2017 meeting of the Victoria City Council. First order of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, Lori, any changes to the agenda?
There are no changes, Mayor.
Council, any changes? All right, can I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, if I could pull off item C on the consent agenda.
We're not there yet.
Okay, I'm not there yet. All right, we'll get.
Can I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
Okay, I'm sorry. I'll make a motion we adopt the agenda.
Second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Hearing none. Passes unanimously 4-0. Just for the record, Councilmember Vogt will not be joining us tonight. He is out of town. Next item on the agenda is the open forum. I've got 4 slips. First one, Judy Black. Please state your name and address for the record.
Hi,
Hi.
my name is Judy Black, and I live at 1938 Woodstone Drive. And this is my 3rd time here, and hopefully I won't be as nervous as last time. I just wanted to update everyone on the petition that I started asking for the lawsuit to be dropped. And in 12 days, I've gotten 159 signatures, and it will be ongoing until hopefully everyone settles everything. But I just wanted to get that out there and make sure everyone knew that if they want to sign the petition, they can Google it. It is online. It's Petition for Victoria MN. If they have questions, they can email me at petitionforvictoriamn@gmail.com. Okay? Thank you so much.
Okay, you're welcome. Next up, Victoria Bount. Again, please state your name and your address for the record, please.
Hello, my name is Victoria Bont, and yes, they named the city after me. I live at 8870 Deer Run Drive. I too have been concerned about this ongoing lawsuit. I've lived here 17 years. I've been on numerous city committees. I've been on several school board committees. Very aware of the open door meeting law. Immediately, the very first committee I was on. So I think it was a very important lesson for all of us to learn. I don't think any politician in the near future in Victoria will ever cross that problem again because, again, it was a lesson well learned. However, I think that there is an important thing that has been very overlooked through this whole issue. I've been here 17 years. When I first came here, the city of Victoria had a city hall that was a pile of crap. It was too small. Couldn't do business in it. Couldn't keep our records there. It was full of black mold. The people that worked there served us faithfully, and their health was in danger. We had a city garage, too small. We had to keep stuff outside. It literally took 2 hours out of their day every day to get the equipment they needed to do their job and then put it away. And a lot of stuff sat outside. It endangered their health also to move that stuff every day. And we didn't have a library. I watched administration after administration knock their heads against a wall. Not just any wall, it was like the Berlin Wall. And we didn't have Ronald Reagan. We didn't get any of those things through several fantastic administrations. Now, this administration that was found guilty of the closed-door law. I'm not here to debate what they did, because I know full well what they did. They did accomplish 3 things. I'm standing in a building where our great administration and our city officials and workers do a very good job, dealt with them on many occasions. And we have a library, icing on the cake. 36,000 people came through that door last year. That's, I don't do math very well. I think it's 4.4 visits per person for the city. And that's icing on the cake. Plus, we have a city garage. They accomplished all that. Not expecting financial gain. Does the public know that? This wasn't a dirty deal to get money. They were just doing their civic duty because they loved Victoria. So they did that. And now they keep facing, and the garage. They can find stuff right away. They don't spend 2 hours looking for it. If somebody has a water main blow, they can get the truck or whatever they need and get right out there. And we don't have equipment rusting and going to heck outside. They got it done. I think it should be pointed out to the public that they were found guilty and they were fined money. They didn't have a glamour job. They didn't get a lot of money. This is Victoria, not New York City, where they got paid in the thousands of dollars for what they did. I don't think they did it purposely, but I'm not here to debate that. What I am here to debate is it's time to move on. It's time to appreciate what they did. And oh my God, maybe they didn't put it where you wanted and they brought more people downtown. You know what? How many cities around Minnesota would love to have that problem of too many people downtown? And especially after 5 o'clock, we have too many people downtown with our burgeoning hospitality industry in Victoria. Because we certainly have that, don't we? And we should put all our efforts to be doing that. Because that's what I hear the most about. I can't park anywhere. I want to go downtown. Sometimes I drive through downtown because I can't park to eat or I can't park to go to the library. We have lots of creative minds here. We have people here. I know these men, and I know some of them through business, personally, who have super creative minds, who are very, very focused, intelligent.
Excuse me a second. You've gone over your time, so I don't want to cut you off. Please wrap up, though.
I will.
Thank you.
I am at the very end here. You are so concerned about Victoria. Do what we need now. And let's not have any more time spent on this at City Council. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Gordy Simonton, if I got that right. Please state name and
No, Mayor,
address.
but you're not the first one to get that wrong. So it's Simonton.
Simonton, thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, council members, and staff. Thanks for this opportunity this evening. My first order of business tonight is to provide full disclosure. It seems to be a key thing with transparency here since the beginning of the year that I served on for the City of Victoria as a member of the Planning Commission, chair of the Planning Commission, and also the City Council from 1998 to 2008. Second, I've streamed every City Council meeting in 2017 and have been in attendance at several meetings here in the hall as well, and I've read all the commentaries in the Chan Villager. My observations at this point, I would classify the current state of the city as an alarming situation. The overwhelming majority of meetings, discussions, and public hearings being held embroiled in past legal battles, which is taking valuable resources, energy, and focus from both staff and the council, creating unnecessary distractions and inefficiencies for the city. In short, the tone and attitude that's been set forward by this administration is divisive and counterproductive with minimal attention to the present and future needs of Victoria. Case in point, this city has before them an overall development, implementation, and final submission of the 24 Comprehensive Plan to the Met Council. During my tenure with the city, I worked on the 2030 comp plan to the Metropolitan Council, and I chaired that on the Planning Commission, and I'm acutely aware of the magnitude of this endeavor and the countless hours required. It requires extensive coordination by the city staff, council, numerous commissions, and volunteer residents to complete this arduous and time-consuming task. Just to list the major underpinnings required for the implementation and completion of this comprehensive plan are in the following categories: land use, natural resources, parks, trails, open space, community facilities, housing, economic development, sanitary sewer, categorical water use, and transportation. The due date for the final submission to the Met Council is December of 2018. Now, on the surface, this may seem like more than adequate timeline to complete this important initiative. However, I would submit to you that these endless minatory legal actions that continue to drag on both the sitting council members and selected staff has created a destabilizing work environment. I don't even have to be here during the workday to know that the activity by the city staff is not being focused adequately on the 2040 comp plan or more other pressing matters for the city. Rather, this unrelenting fear spawns waves of internal gossip and uncertainty monopolizing the days, nights, and weekends of your 23 city staff employees. Speaking from experience, Mr. Mayor, you're going to need your very best to complete the 24 comp plan, and you're going to need your varsity lineup on the field. My concern is with your entire team having a perceived need for self-preservation, you will end up with a junior varsity that does not have the experience nor the background to complete the successful completion of this plan. Are there financial penalties for missing the submission date with the Met Council? No, there are not. But there are significant consequences for missing the submission deadline that would have devastating long-term financial impact to the city. Case in point, after that date, a community can only implement the plan they currently have without any changes. In other words, our current outdated 2030 comp plan would be in play. A community cannot implement any changes to the local plan without first receiving authorization from the Met Council. This means any unanticipated development or redevelopment could not go forward if it's not covered in the current comprehensive plan. This also puts the community's plan increasingly out of sync with other adjacent communities and other affected jurisdictions, including watersheds, local water supply, and sanitary sewer. Eligibility for grants would be affected, specifically any of the Livable Community Act program grants, including livable community demonstration accounts, tax-based revitalization accounts, and the local housing incentive account. And finally, a community may also limit their eligibility for funding for local transportation projects through the regional solicitation process. In closing, I'm concerned if this current direction continues, the aftermath will someday be viewed simply as a Pyrrhic victory. A Pyrrhic victory is named after a Greek king, Pyrrhus, whose armies suffered irreplaceable casualties defeating the Romans in conflicts in 280 BC. The king never lost a battle, but his victories inflicted such a devastating toll on both the king and his armies that it was tantamount to defeat. Someone who wins a Pyrrhic victory has been victorious in some manner, but the heavy toll negates any sense of achievement or reward. Thank you for your attention. That concludes my comments.
Thank you. Last up, Lawrence Gooby.
Thank you, Mayor, council members. I'm Lawrence Gooby. I live at 7848 Bavaria Road in the city of Victoria. Tonight, I'm up here to explore a couple of myths that are currently being promulgated by some of the public officials who were found guilty of a multitude of violations of the open meeting law. I might qualify with that to say that the judge found them to be intentional violations, 38 counts. First myth. Recently, several people have resigned from the Victoria for a Lifetime Committee, including former Mayor Tom O'Connor. It's unfortunate that these people have chosen to resign. And I've heard that the reason given for the resignations is that the committee members are concerned that they might, by what they term the current litigious environment, and that they might be accidentally violate the open meeting law and get sued. I've also heard this expressed by one or more of the sitting council members. Here are some facts that belie this allegation. Number one, no one in this city has been sued for accidentally violating the open meeting law. 4 people who ran for and were elected to positions of trust in this city intentionally violated the open meeting law to hide actions from the residents. Number 2, although the plaintiff's attorney provided his time pro bono, it will cost the residents who sued them between $10,000 and $20,000 out of their own pockets. The attorney was pro bono, but it wasn't free to the residents that filed the suit. Fact number 3, the open meeting law is not complicated. As Judge Bart Kane started in her decision on the open meeting law cases, the concepts of the OML can be conveyed and understood in a matter of minutes. Compliance with the open meeting law is important for several reasons. It's important to our society and its democratic principles. It promotes open and transparent government and ensures that the public's interests are represented and accounted for. It ensures that we are kept informed of what our elected officials are doing and why. If members of the governing body or its committees are not committed to complying with the open meeting law, then our city is probably better off with others who are committed to following the law. By pursuing this lawsuit, myth number 2 or 3, by pursuing this lawsuit, the plaintiffs are costing the city of Victoria thousands of dollars. Fact, if the public officials had not intentionally violated the open meeting law on multiple occasions, there would be no lawsuit. The public official's attorney would not have been paid over $433,000 to defend them. But they did intentionally violate the law, and after a 6-day trial in which all 4 public officials testified at length, the court stated with disgust, the defendants professed their ignorance of the OML to a degree that the court finds shameful with regard to their duty to the public. This shameful misconduct of the public officials want the residents of the city to sanction by making us pay their legal fees for them. The cost of defending the public officials was borne, this is also a myth, the cost of defending the public officials was borne by an insurance policy the city carries through the League of Minnesota Cities. This implies that by having this coverage, there is no cost to the city or its residents. Here's the facts. The League of Minnesota Cities self-insures. The money that the League spent in defense of these public officials came from payments that member cities make to the League, which in turn comes from the residents of all the cities who are members of the League. The very taxpayers whose trust they betrayed were forced to open their pocketbooks and defend the officials by paying their legal costs. In conclusion, it's really sad that the story doesn't end there. The very same officials who repeatedly and intentionally violated the open meeting law are still requiring the taxpaying residents of this city to spend their tax dollars to help them retain their offices. To date, they have spent over $33,000 of taxpayer dollars in this effort and have approved a check for another $9,000, and at the last council meeting tried to require the taxpayers of the city to commit another $30,000 for future payments, with apparently no end in sight. All to pay their lawyers to help them retain the offices that they knowingly and intentionally abused and are continuing to abuse to this day.
Please wrap up.
I'm done. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Anyone else?
I feel I should, but maybe that's enough.
Visitors presentation. Lori?
Thank you, Mayor. Tonight we have Barb Hone, who is a past president with the Carver County Arts Consortium, here to give us an update on the activities of the Arts Consortium. And while Barb makes her way up to the podium, we've all seen, if you've been in the council chambers, that we have a rotating arts exhibit, and that is courtesy of the good work that Barb and her team do. And it's a pleasure to have them be a part of our City Hall.
Barb, could you please state your name again and your position for the record?
Sure. Barb Hone, Hone, and the address is 2892 Fairway Drive. And I'm an outsider. I'm from Chaska. So thank you for the opportunity to be here this evening, Mayor and council members. I have 2 handouts, if I may. There are 2 pages to that. The first handout is the Arts Consortium at a glance, all of the things that we're involved in 2017. So maybe at your leisure you can look over that. Yeah, thanks, Lori, for coordinating with us so we can have the art up in the center. We appreciate that. I'm here for 2 reasons. One, as she said, to introduce and update you on the Arts Consortium. For those of you who aren't even familiar with us, anybody want to? Well, no, I won't ask. Anyway, we are Arts Consortium of Carver County, and we have been, we were started in '09, so this is like our 8th year, and we have accomplished a ton. I think you'll note when you look over that at a glance. Our mission is literally, the Arts Consortium strengthens our community through the arts and cultivates the arts through the community. And we have done that in a number of ways. Artstock is our annual festival at Parley Lake Winery. Art Wander is a studio tour throughout the whole county, and that's the last full weekend in September each year. Barn quilts. I'm hoping that some of you have noticed the barn quilts in the county. And the closest one to you is on 78th Street, the German crest. If you haven't driven by, check out the family crest of Jack Barkoff. We have exhibits, a contract for rotating exhibits at Ridgeview Hospital. We have an exhibit here, and we also show in the chambers at Shorewood City Hall. We have 3 CDs. I have a kind of fold-out that's not too staying folded out over there. But this spring, we're producing our 3rd CD, and it's all original music from Carver County songwriters and musicians, so we're really proud of that. One way we stay involved with the community as well as through contests. We've had, we're on a 4th poetry contest and 2nd photography. Flash fiction is new this year, but those things involve school kids too. We have categories for 1st through 3rd grade, et cetera, and it's an exciting way to be part of education in the county with the arts. The best example locally for art and community was last year this time when the bandstand opened. This elementary, Victoria Elementary, was here, and the Arts Consortium provided music. All of the day activities for that event were sponsored by the Arts Consortium. And as to Mary Hirschberger Toon's wishes, she wanted kids to be the first on the bandstand. And it was 5th grade band that performed first and actually had a 5th grade director. So that was exciting to introduce them as well to the community bandstand. Secondly, well, I guess I could ask if there are any questions about who we are, what we do, or anything. Okay. Secondly, I'm here to ask if you would be a major sponsor for us. And the reason is we're gearing up to make Victoria the county's art destination. And the reason I say that is Hartman Communities has offered the ACCC a home in the lower level of the Noterman building. And the time frame right now is set for, it's hoping the end of July, middle at the end of July, and we're kind of counting on at least getting in August prior to the first Victoria Art Fair that will be held here on August 12th. So we're really excited about this opportunity because that facility will be able to house, we'll have openings, we'll have an art gallery, in the future retail space for artists in the county. So we're really excited about that. And another major relationship that we've developed is with Charleston Meadows. It's a retreat center over off of Route 7. And they approached the Arts Consortium and asked if we'd participate in developing an artist residency program. And that's been delayed by their timeline a little bit. They're redoing some buildings there. But we're excited about that and the possibility of artists providing or creating the work there and maybe being able to sell it in the Art Center here in Victoria. So that would be a good relationship for everybody. Another relationship here locally is with Inky. Have already hosted one event and are planning to do future events with us with Paint and Pub and possibly a monthly Meet the Artist and a monthly exhibit, art exhibit there. The Barn Quilt Project. We're actually kind of hoping that maybe we can get a tour with the classic cars. I have to show you, or you can look later at the exhibit. Last year there was a tour with Model A cars, and it was a surprise tour, adventure, mystery tour for them, but there were like 35 Model A's going around during the Barn Quilt Tour. So that is a major event in the county. Proof of that is just last week we were invited to be a vendor, the Barn Quilt portion of us, invited to be a vendor at Explore Minnesota, and they are planning to promote us, which we're excited about. And in light of that, too, with the German Crest close by, when tours do go around to the Barn Quilts, and if you're not familiar with it, there are coach buses that go around like 55 quilt lovers at a time touring the county. And with the one here in Victoria, the tour director would plan to stop in the city and choose one of the restaurants at lunchtime or maybe a box lunch in the Bandstand Park. So that would bring money to Victoria, just that event. And when there are tours, we'd plan to have the Arts Center open as well to benefit not only the community but the artists. Another thought that we are just kind of a dream in the future with the new bandstand, we would like to think about having an annual music festival here. So just an idea to throw out. And discussions with other cities include the possibility of a mural in each town in the county that would promote travel around the entire county, and also the idea of a sculpture walk. So those are both ideas that we would promote as artists if there was agreement in those. So asking for your support, and I'll pass out, I've got packets here with our membership information, and on one side of the card is for businesses, cities, promoters, and also the other side is then for individuals. So would love you to consider joining the city, supporting us, and also as individuals if you would. So it's all for economic development of the city, the county, and promotion of arts and community. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Would you mind if I leave that picture board here? I'm going to be back on Wednesday to put up more art, if you're okay with that.
Be happy.
Yeah, that's fine. Lori, since this was handed out to the council, could you use a copy and place it on the agenda so the public could see what we were given?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Barb. Next item, consent agenda. Anything that the council wants to remove?
Okay, now it's my turn, right?
Yes. No.
Okay, I'll take off item number C, item letter C.
Okay, C. Is there anything else? All right, hearing nothing, can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda minus item C, which we'll take up immediately after approving the rest of the items?
I'll make a motion omitting item C from the consent agenda
And approving the rest?
and approving the rest.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no. Hearing none, consent agenda is passed minus item C. We'll take up item C right now. Councilmember Gregory, since you pulled it off, would you start the discussion?
Sure, and there's just a few questions for Kara, and not that I have any objection to it, but it's a big project. It's about estimated at $539,000, and I just wanted to just kind of point it out and ask just a few general questions and terms that I've never heard before. A filtration bench, I've never heard that term. So if you could just explain a little bit about what these filtration systems look like. Also, there's an underground one by the condo. I'm curious on what that looks like. And then the map, the boundaries of this map, how are they drawn, and what are the significance of that boundary?
Sure. Okay, happy to walk through that history. So the city originally constructed stormwater ponds for the downtown area back in 2003. So they were constructed as part of the first phase of downtown improvements, and it's a two-pond system. So just kind of north of Kirklocken Park and off the trail, there are two stormwater ponds. This one actually doesn't routinely have water in it. But these ponds treat all of the water that is generated from within the area shown in yellow. So the green area is all discharged to Steiger Lake, but the yellow area is discharged to this pond system. So those outlines were actually drawn in 2002 when we were developing the regional pond system, just primarily based on which way water flows, which way is downhill, and which areas we were able to serve by a gravity storm sewer system. So this graphic just used those original drawing from 2002 to identify which areas were served under that old system. So this system was constructed in 2003, but more recently the watershed district's rules changed in terms of what was required for stormwater treatment for redevelopment projects. So about, I guess it would be a year ago now, maybe a little bit longer, folks from Minnehaha Creek Watershed District helped us out by taking a look at what some possible projects were that we could consider undertaking to enhance our regional stormwater system to meet the current treatment standards for the Watershed District. So at that time, they looked at the 4 different projects that are shown here. 2 over by the regional ponds, 1 at the condo, and 1 at the pond system that was constructed as part of the bandstand project. Through their review, it was determined that these 2 projects weren't necessarily worth the expense associated with proceeding with 4 and 3, but they assisted the city in applying for a grant application for Clean Water Legacy Funds for items number 1 and 2. So what the agenda item is for tonight is for engineering services to help us with the design of improving the system over here. So the things that were identified were constructing a filtration bench and an iron enhanced filtration bench. So what that means is within the area, the stormwater ponds that are over here right now are just entirely clay. So water hits those ponds and the sediment can settle out over time or it'll evaporate, but if any of you have dug in our heavy clay soils, water doesn't go through them. So both of these improvements would involve excavating a portion of that soil and bringing in sandy material and a drain tile system. In the case of the filtration bench, in the iron filtration bench, there would be sand enhanced with iron, both of which are designed to remove additional phosphorus from the water before it's discharged out of the pond system. So it's enhancing the water quality features of those ponds. And so we were successful in getting those grant dollars, which were in my staff report. What the dollar amount is. The grant amount was $262,520. And if I hop back over to this graphic, that covers the cost of the first two, these 1 and 2 up here that had an estimated cost of like $210,000 in construction costs. And then, of course, there's engineering services on top of that $210 amount. So it's anticipated that the grant will cover the majority of the project costs, with stormwater utility funds picking up any difference in costs once we figure out what the details are of the design. So does that answer your questions?
Yeah, so are we on our own for the underground number 4?
Right now, these were included in the initial analysis, but we're determined to not necessarily have the cost benefit to proceed with them. So we're not at this point planning to do either 3 or 4.
So the project is 100% covered by grant? That's pretty good.
Plus some staff time and a
Good.
little bit of matching funds.
Appreciate that.
Yes.
Thank you.
So as noted in the agenda statement, what staff's looking for is authorization for Wenck Associates to provide professional services in an amount not to exceed $42,430 for the Downtown Basin Enhancement Project.
Is that, using a consultant for that type of work, is that standard practice, or is there normally somebody that's part of the focus team that would do that?
No, this is specialty engineering services, so it's a water resource firm that has experience with designing these types of systems throughout the area. They worked on the grant application for Wenck, so we did solicit proposals from more than one consultant, but their price was lower. Both firms were qualified, but they had a lower price.
And then with respect to the iron enhanced salt or sand fill, does that need to be refreshed at some point in time, or is that, what's the lifespan of that?
Correct. I don't know what the actual lifespan is off the top of it, but as part of the design phase services, we'll be making sure we understand what the operation and maintenance plan is so that we can be prepared to maintain it. That will be our infrastructure to maintain as it is today.
Thank you.
Council, other questions? Okay, can I have a motion to approve this?
I'll make a motion. We authorize Wenck Associates Incorporated to provide professional services in the amount not to exceed $42,430 for the Downtown Basin Enhancement Project.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing none, motion passes 4-0. Next item. Lori, donations?
Yes, Mayor. We received a number of generous donations from community members and businesses, and we would just be looking for a motion to accept those and thank those donors.
I'll move we approve donations from Ridgeview Medical Center, the amount of $100 for Movies in the Park, Foss Swim School for $175 for T-ball and coach pitch, Radiance Dental, the amount of $100 for T-ball and coach pitch, Power of Life Chiropractic Center, $150 for concerts in the park, Midwest Dental Care, $100 for concerts in the park, Excel Energy, $200 for movies in the park, Sun Country Airlines Hometown Lakes Project, print valued at $250, and we thank them all very much for their generosity.
Second that.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Hearing none, passed 4-0. Next item, Lori, do you want to introduce this, the chickens?
Yeah, we will have a staff report from our senior planner, but as the council is aware, we've received several inquiries from residents that are interested in having the code revised to allow chickens in residential zoning districts. 2 of the young ladies are here tonight. They've indicated they don't want to speak, but I thank them for coming to be part of the process. And I will let Aaron Smith give you an overview of the issue.
Thank you, Aaron.
Mayor and Council. Like Lori said, tonight we're going to be discussing chickens within residential districts. As our city code stands today, chickens are permitted within our ag district, but not in the residential district. It sounds like the girls in the audience are chicken fanatics, and they might debunk some of my facts. So I would invite them, if I step out of bounds, to join us. So the discussion tonight is very general. We're just wondering if council is interested in moving forward with exploring chickens in residential districts, and if you have initial comments or concerns that you would like to hear some more information about at a later meeting. Many communities across Minnesota are having similar discussions right now. It's one of the buzzwords in planning today. So communities near Victoria that permit chickens within residential districts include Carver, Minnetonka, Shakopee, Jordan, and Savage. And communities that do not permit chickens within residential districts but do in ag districts include Chaska, Eden Prairie, and Chanhassen. So across those ordinances of cities that do allow chickens in residential districts, a lot of the information is similar. So some of the big points that if we choose to move forward with an ordinance that we would likely move forward with include that roosters are not permitted within residential districts, largely due to noise, and they tend to be the more aggressive sex of chickens. A coop must be 25 feet from all property lines. Coops and runs must be kept in a sanitary condition, free of vermin. Storage of food for the chickens must be kept in sealed containers. Sale of eggs is not permitted on premise. Slaughtering of birds is not permitted on premise. And chickens may not have free range, so they must be kept in an enclosed coop and run. So some fascinating facts that I've learned in the past week about chickens. Hens typically lay from about 6 months of age until they're about 3 to 4 years old. They can continue to lay into their later years, but that's really the sweet spot where you're getting the most eggs. On average, a chicken can live to be 8 to 10 years of age. A rooster is not necessary for a hen to lay eggs. 5 eggs per week is a typical yield. This one is probably my favorite. I've learned that chickens are rather social, and it's a good idea to have 3 to 5 chickens together. If it's 2, they tend to get aggressive towards each other, and 1 chicken is a lonely chicken. And then there's some recommended square footage per chicken that is recommended. So it's 4 feet within the coop, which is the enclosed structure, which is generally heated, and then 10 square feet of run space for chickens so they're able to get out and get some exercise. So you might be wondering, what are some of these impacts of having chickens within residential districts? So some positive impacts that could come with allowing chickens in residential districts. It's a good lesson in self-sufficiency, having fresh eggs in your backyard. Chickens are known to be friendly. I've read where people form really strong bonds with their chickens. And it's a good opportunity for education about agriculture, local food, and responsibility of caring for animals. And the other side of the coin, possible negative impacts. So if they're allowed in residential districts as opposed to ag, there's the nuisance related to smell and cleanliness, irresponsible owners, increased number of natural predators and vermin, along with noise. So people often think about noise with roosters, but hens, of course, do cluck as well. If the council chooses to move forward, we can write some of this into the ordinance, stating that the negative impacts will need to be mitigated for the coop to remain on property. So again, tonight, we're just looking for some general feedback if you're looking to move forward with chickens in residential districts, if you would like language for a new ordinance, if we'll permit it, permit costs, going through creating of the form. The information will go to the Planning Commission as well, so just some information for them to start fleshing out some language that could be in a proposed ordinance. And if you have initial comments or concerns, if I don't know them, I think the 2 young gals that are excited about chickens might in the audience. So I'll open it up for discussion.
Council, questions of staff?
Well, I think it's nothing new. This is not innovative. I think many metro cities that already allow this. I've read more than 24 allow that. Cities like Minneapolis, Edina, St. Louis Park, Roseville, Burnsville. So the list is long in many, and I think many people are looking for fresh and natural sources of food, and to have one in your backyard, it can't get much more fresh than that. I think it can be a great learning tool or teaching tool for parents, teaching about where their food comes from, and teaching responsibility to having the kids taking care of them. I think that can be a great tool for parents. For retirees, it can be a great hobby. Overall, I mean, I know there's can be issues, but there can be issues with all pets. I think if people can be responsible dog and cat owners, they can be responsible chicken owners as well. My thoughts.
I think the the trend towards organic and fresh and closer to home is pretty well established, and it sounds like pretty much all of our neighbors are already allowing this. Certainly there can be negatives, but I'm kind of in favor of more freedom rather than less, and so I would say, let's draft some language, and if I'm not mistaken, the process would go through a couple of public hearings, allowing people the opportunity to comment on it and refine it in a way that we can all still be good neighbors and get something that can work.
That is correct. So if we move forward with an ordinance, it will work through the channels of the Planning Commission with the public hearing.
On the surface, this sounds like a really neat learning experience and an opportunity to have fresh eggs. And but I also think around, call it the ecosystem, the entire process of setting this up and doing so effectively. And we live essentially in a rural city, and I hear the coyotes at night, and I don't need another reason to have a coyote running around now that there are chickens. So that concerns me. I'm concerned that it's a slippery slope. I'd love to have a chicken in the backyard, but then I want a goat, and then I want something else. And I'm sorry, this is a city. We're in the city limits, and so yes, I did hear that there are cities around us that have ordinances that allow this to occur, but I also heard that Chaska and Chanhassen do not. And it's the cities that are right around us that I want to understand why. So before I would say that I'm in favor of this, I would like to understand why Chanhassen and Chaska do not.
Sure.
I also think that there is perhaps a commercial solution to this that helps us learn about it rather than jumping in feet first. And that is that there are areas within the city of Victoria that are agriculturally zoned, and it would be very easy, that's the wrong choice of words, it could be solved in a commercial manner to have someone put up a chicken coop where you can lease space for your chickens. And maybe that's an easy way to start and understand, and that way it would be zoned in an agricultural area, and you would still have access to your personal chickens. They're not in your yard, but I guess I'd like to try to see if there's a way to solve it commercially first, or at least get our feet wet to understand it. There are coyotes in our neighborhood. I don't want coyotes in my backyard. These will attract coyotes. So I'm sorry. I see that you're disappointed. This sounds like fun, but it's also very important that we understand and try to consider all the aspects of this to make sure that it's safe for you. If you're walking out to the chicken coop, I don't want a coyote out there. So we have to make sure that everybody is safe. And so before we jump into this, I would like us to take a step back and consider all of these things to make sure that we're taking a big step here with this, and it has a lot of ramifications, and I didn't hear any of those ramifications considered. So maybe just think a little bit longer and help us think through it a little bit more is my choice.
Two quick comments. I'm not opposed to this. I think it's fine, but we have a lot of HOAs that prohibit additional structures. I think the default position of the city should be that they're not allowed, but if an HOA were to vote and the residents decided within their neighborhood they wanted to allow it, I think we should put that decision in their hands. In the second point, in the case where there's not an HOA, I think we need to have the people that would want to have chickens, just like if any of you have experienced where a neighbor puts a fence up and you may have to sign a waiver because they want to put the fence on the property line. We have a similar, maybe we create a similar process in neighborhoods where there's not an HOA, where all the neighbors would have to sign off, and then maybe neighbors within a certain distance. I don't know what that would be. But this way, by default, they're not approved. But if a neighborhood wants to do it and they get enough people and everybody agrees, that would be allowed. So it kind of, if you will, delegates this down to the local neighborhoods. So I'd like to see that considered as an option here. Council, additional comments or direction to the staff?
Well, I think there is opportunity for more discussion. To your point, Mr. Mayor, I'd almost like to go to the opposite approach, make it okay for the city, but allow HOAs to veto it if they so choose. That way, a whole neighborhood under an approved association could veto it. But nonetheless, I think it's worth further discussing. And Councilman Curley had made some very good points, and that's all of those issues can be ferreted out through more discussion.
Yeah, I think we put all of these options on the table in, at a future hearing. We'll let the public come in and provide comment, feedback.
So I think those are the kinds of things that the draft language should address, or the questions. I also, I think the question that popped in my head is, in the event of HOAs and neighborhood covenants, what takes precedent? I mean, who wins, right? Is it just, if the city says yes, but then the individual HOAs, which are legal entities, they can override it? Or how does that, the two things, if they're in conflict, how does that, who
Sure.
wins?
So if someone comes in today for a shed permit and they ask the city, they move through the process, I generally will give them a heads up and say, you'll want to run this by your HOA board. So we can permit something that the HOA vetoes, but we generally are the first ones to say yes to the permit, and then it goes to the HOA board, or at least the type of structure they might be thinking about building.
Okay, yeah, and so any of those kinds of considerations, whatever, if it would be licensing or inspections, whatever kind of caveats we would build in, just or that might be part of that, just include those in the draft language. And
Sure.
thank you.
Further comment? Do you have enough direction? Any other questions?
No, I think I'm good. Thank you.
All right, you're welcome. Okay, moving on. Next, unfinished business, Wasserman Park. Ben, is this you?
We'll change it up a little bit. I'll be up here for the presentation tonight just because I'll have James Whisker, the Director of Development for the Watershed District, come up and join me in a minute.
You need a clicker.
Technical problems?
That would help. Few minor technical difficulties. So tonight, before we get into kind of the details that I know you have already discussed with me individually, I wanted to at least provide the opportunity for the district to kind of highlight the partnership that the city of Victoria has started to go down with the district, not only with this project, but how kind of this folds into a greater level of framework in terms of natural resources within the watershed district that relates specifically to Victoria and kind of the broader area that the district is emphasizing in some of their comprehensive planning. And instead of me giving that, I thought it would be better to kind of hear from the watershed district themselves and have them even give us a little bit of background that I know you all had asked for at the last meeting of why this site, why this property, and more details of just how is this partnership good for the district and the city as well. So after we hear from James, I'll come back and we can talk through some of the details of the agreement that you have before you as well as the financials. But at this time, invite James to come up and give you an overview.
Thank you, Ben. James, for the record, name and your position for the public.
Mr. Mayor, Council, thank you, Ben. James Whisker, Director of Planning for the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District.
Thank you.
So as Ben mentioned, tonight we're here for, and we're excited to be here, for the City Council's consideration of a partnership opportunity to acquire some land for a park on the west side of Wasserman Lake, as well as some strategic water quality improvements for Wasserman Lake. That's part of an overarching strategy of the district, working with local communities on the west side of Minnetonka in a pretty large area that I'm going to outline, trying to get some regional scale water quality improvements. What you're going to hear tonight is something that you've seen evolve as a concept, moving through Parks Commission and several council work sessions, I think with plenty of presentation previously from the district. So tonight I'll be deferring to city staff to represent the city's interests, talk about the transaction structure and the costs and the financing. But again, as Ben mentioned, given the district's long-range commitment to this geography for both the public and the council, I figured I would start with some broader context for the individual project and then review a little bit what's brought us here tonight to consider this partnership. So first, to orient folks that might be unfamiliar with the Minnehaha Creek watershed, around the 6 Mile Creek Halstead Bay geography. This is a 27 square mile area of land that drains into the westernmost bay of Lake Minnetonka, Halstead Bay. And within the whole district, this is significant because we cover 181 square miles, 120 lakes, 11 major streams, 29 communities, 2 counties, and a series of park districts. So you might be asking, why is it that the Watershed District would choose to focus strategically in this area, building partnerships, looking at clean water for the next 8 to 10 years? And here's a blow-up of that geography. And basically, this landscape is very rich in natural resources. There's more than 13 major lakes, 12 miles of stream system, hundreds of acres of wetlands, and a lot of regionally significant, that's not a problem, and significant regional ecological areas like 6 Mile Marsh and also areas down in near the neck of the woods. While it's rich in resources, a lot of the water bodies in the area are impaired. They don't meet state water quality standards. All of this area drains to Halstead Bay on Minnetonka, which is also impaired and is a regionally significant resource, and is actually one of the most degraded water bodies in the Minnehaha Creek watershed district. So that's, from a water quality perspective, there's a lot of strategic reasons that we'd be focused out here. Beyond that, there's significant opportunity for the district to effectuate its mission. The area is moving through substantial planned development and growth, and there are a lot of opportunities for our work to be woven in to local priorities, local investments as utilities are laid out, roads are laid out, as Victoria grows and expands. There's opportunities for us to layer in our water quality improvements into the developing landscape, as opposed to other areas, Hopkins, St. Louis Park, Minneapolis, where we might have worked in the past, where you're fixing problems from planned development or unplanned development of the 40s, 50s, 60s. And finally, I wanted to emphasize partnerships. This is central to everything that the Watershed District does. We don't do any of our work outside of partnership. We don't operate on our own in a vacuum. And in this area, we're very blessed with a rich suite of partners, including the City of Victoria. We've got the City of Minnetrista, St. Bonifacius, Carver and Hennepin Counties, Three Rivers Park District, Laketown Township, Carver Soil and Water Conservation District, and that's just at a local level. We have state partners, federal partners. They're going to help us fund some of the improvements that need to be done out here. In terms of how the Watershed District thinks about its work in a partnership frame, I think you've seen this before. This is essentially a graphic for the watershed's planning model. The first thing that we want to do and what the watershed brings to the table with its skill set is a rich understanding of what the natural resource issues are, what are causing those issues, and what can be done to fix those issues. But it's really important, and we've learned this working all the way across the district, that rich science understanding be integrated locally, have local context with local priorities. And so it's very important to us that we understand what the City of Victoria's goals are, short, mid, and long term, so that as we're planning water quality improvements, we can be doing those in a way that get win-win mutual benefits. And so we want to start with natural resources, understand local priorities, integrate those together, and produce an implementation plan. So right now, this whole geography, we're going through a large-scale planning effort as part of our own comprehensive planning effort. You heard earlier about the city's effort for its 2040 plan. The Watershed District is updating its 10-year plan, and this whole focal area is one of strategic significance. In terms of the value that's created when we understand what's happening locally, I think Councilmember Gregory pulled the agenda item for the regional stormwater treatment for downtown. There's already a number of examples that the watershed and the City of Victoria are very fortunate to have under its belt. The downtown development, the watershed district secured $260,000 for us to start cleaning up water that's draining into Auburn, while also facilitating growth within the downtown area, which we know is something of a priority for the city. We've worked with Lennar, one of your national home builders that's done a lot of work around the area on the south side of Wasserman Lake, to have them spend private capital for public benefit rather than going to a wetland bank that might be out in Washington County as part of the district's technical advice and partnership with Lennar and the city. Lennar spent its own money to mitigate on-site a 12-acre wetland that treats some of the water coming into Wasserman. We've worked closely with the mayor, council, and residents in Carver County, Three Rivers, on Zumbra Lake. We're partnering on Schutz Lake. So tonight we're just talking about yet another example in this Wasserman West Park of what we think is a series of long-range successful partnerships the district and the city can enjoy together. In terms of the science, the first layer in that planning model, we have a very simple issue driver strategy model that informs a lot of our planning. So out in this neck of the woods, the main issue that we have for all of our water bodies are too many nutrients, too much phosphorus. And the second box there are some of the drivers or the causes of that excess phosphorus. And if you have a good understanding of what's causing the problem, you can begin to plan what you need to do about it. And so some of the drivers in this area for the excess nutrients that are in our lakes and impairing water quality are runoff that might be happening in the future as part of planned development that we can mitigate through stormwater management that's integrated into development. But some of the main things that I'm going to talk about tonight to provide context for this Wasserman opportunity are carp, altered wetlands, that all of those together disrupt shallow lake ecology, and there's internal loading, phosphorus that's within the lake that we need to do something about. And so we'll talk here about what some of those drivers are more specifically. So within this system, rough fish or carp are one of the biggest actors or biggest drivers on poor water quality. And they're one of the first things that we can do something about because the district has spent the last 3 years partnering with the University of Minnesota's Aquatic Invasive Species Research Institute to understand what fish are doing in the system. This might seem a little out there, but what we've learned is that the carp feed on the bottom sediment. They're essentially pushing all of the sediment from the bottom of the lake up into the water column, making the water very cloudy. They disrupt all of the plants that might otherwise grow in the shallow parts of your lake and hold those sediments in place. And so they can disrupt, they're really ecosystem engineers, much like a beaver might be. They can disrupt an entire chain of lakes' water quality. And without doing something about that first, anything that you might do on the landscape or if you want to treat internal loading is going to have much less impact. So carp are key to this system. And we have spent our time with the experts at the University of Minnesota understanding two basic things: where these fish go to reproduce and where they aggregate in the winter. And just very briefly, carp can lay 2 million eggs a year. You could have hundreds or thousands of carp in a particular lake. So if they're successfully able to reproduce in a given year, you could have millions and millions and millions of new carp being recruited into the system. So what the university research has pioneered is if you don't do something about that, you can never effectively manage carp. In the winter, they're kind of curious creatures. They aggregate in dense balls under the ice, making them actually easy to harvest if you know where they're going. And we've done some pilot fishing or pilot seining on Wasserman Lake that's shown a lot of promise because we've tagged these fish and we know where they're aggregating across the system. This map shows where carp within specific lakes exceed a density threshold that is very damaging to ecosystem health. The red lakes are all over a 100 kilograms per hectare threshold, or actually on the highest end of that range, and you can see Wasserman is one of them. Some of the shallow lakes down near Halstead, and some of the lakes in the middle of the system in Carver Park Reserve that are orange, and also carp fisheries. So that's a big issue that we need to deal with, and I'll talk about the funding strategy that goes along with that in a minute. The second thing is actually coming from the landscape, and that are wetlands. The area is rich in wetlands that have been hydrologically altered over the years by people. They've been ditched, drained, new outlet structures put in. They may have received sanitary discharges over the years. They may have received a lot of runoff. And so now these systems are actually not sinks for for phosphorus and nutrients. They actually send phosphorus out. And so restoration of the wetland system and the hydrology in the system is a big strategy component on the landscape. Finally, there's runoff, and we talked about how we might integrate stormwater best practices into the landscape as it develops. And so really the implementation strategy across these 3 or 4 things is twofold. There's things that we need to do inside of the lake, and there's things that we need to do on the landscape. And first, we need to manage carp. One of the easiest ways to do this is to aerate some of the very shallow lake systems where they're going to reproduce. It allows bluegills to survive and predate the eggs. Then in the winter, we can do seining programs. This has been shown effective in other watersheds nearby as a way to control carp down below the 100 kilograms per hectare level so that you can start managing on the landscape and doing alum dosing in the lake. So those are the first 2 things that we'd need to do inside of the lake. The other things that we'd be pursuing long-term on the landscape are the wetland restoration strategies by identifying which ones are the highest pollutant load sources, which ones are on public land, which ones we have funding for, and working through over the next 10 years a systematic way of restoring wetland hydrology through the system. And before I move on, one of the things that I want to mention, we had a great committee meeting today with the City of Victoria and all the other partners around the table where we talked about the funding strategy that needs to go along with this work. Obviously, the Watershed District nor the City of Victoria is fully equipped to finance all of the implementation out here. What we spent the last year doing is building an understanding of what's driving this system, identifying the management strategies, and now we're sort of in the final phase, which is lining up a 10-year plan to bring state and federal funding into this geography for 10 years of concerted management effort. So we are looking at making application very soon in the next month to Lessard-Sams Outdoor Heritage Council for what we feel is a very competitively positioned habitat restoration program for this fisheries management for over $1 million. We'll be looking to LCCMR and Lessard-Sams on a cyclical basis thereafter for all of the wetland restoration that needs to happen. And we're fairly close to securing a bond program with Carver County that will help us finance some of this work too. So over the next 10 years, by virtue of the partnerships that we've cultivated locally and the systems level understanding, we're hoping to leverage for the city and our other partners somewhere between $20 and $30 million in state and federal funds to actually get this work done. And I know that was sort of a lengthy preamble and a lot of watershed science, but I think that's important context for this opportunity that's on the west side of Wasserman, because this is one project of what we hope ends up being many. So before we jump in too far and I turn this over to staff, I wanted to start with the basics, and that's that the city and the Watershed District, before this regional partnership formed, established its own local partnership through a memorandum of understanding that identified Wasserman Lake as a priority for water resource implementation for the city and the district, and as a priority for the city for planned growth. And it's also been identified in your comprehensive plan, or identified in your comprehensive plan, not just Wasserman, that a high priority for the city of Parks and Lakes should be to identify a suitable location for a waterfront park. So knowing that this particular location, and we've discussed this before, this particular wetland complex on the west side of Wasserman is responsible for a sizable portion of nutrient loading to Wasserman Lake, and that through restoration of the wetland system on here and some alum dosing, we could address 15% of the TMDL, about 75 pounds per year, and that the land represents potentially the last opportunity to create program public access to this priority resource as identified in our MOU on one of the highest points in the area. It could potentially fulfill also a high priority park goal for the city. So knowing those two pieces, that this meets water quality benefits, this is the work that we do first. We're going to continue doing carp management inside of the lake through these winter seines, and when that work proves successful, then we'd follow up with alum dosing. That's sort of the three-pronged strategy for Wasserman. And knowing that this could fulfill some park objectives and recreation objectives in this planned priority growth area for the city, the Watershed District worked with staff and the council to secure an option on the property. So really, the district, the value that we've brought to the city here tonight is really just preserving an opportunity for the city council to consider the potential for partnership to acquire this land, plan and implement a project that's much larger than just the watershed district restoring the ecology on the west side. We're pretty pleased with the value we've brought to the table so far, and we're excited for the city council's consideration. In terms of value, the city staff is going to discuss the acquisition value in a little bit more detail than I am, and it's up to your staff to make sure that you're getting a valued transaction here. But the district's fairly confident that we've negotiated a favorable transaction for both parties. Previously, the property has been valued or on the market for sale over $1 million. As you know, having the potential for a 3-lot subdivision. Right now, the purchase agreement that we're in the due diligence phase for between the district and the seller, we've reached agreement on purchase price at $875,000. The seller, from what we can gather, seems pretty pleased with the potential public use and is also planning to secure some tax benefits associated with them selling under their own appraised value. And as I mentioned, city staff can get into that in a little bit more detail. So to wrap up here, I think you've seen this particular concept. This was our obligation that we paid to develop with your staff and run through Parks Commission, this concept here for a range of potential uses on site. And tonight I wanted to point out, in terms of the due diligence window that we have under our purchase agreement with the seller, that this really represents the final point for consideration. If you act tonight to move it forward, we're able to move towards close. If you act not tonight or to delay, we're going to have some issues with running right down to the wire on our due diligence window. So with that, unless there are questions, I want to make sure I get out of the way and leave the analytics and the numbers to your city staff so that they can walk council through the transaction from their perspective.
Thank you very much. Council, questions?
A question on the carp, or maybe kind of a couple of them. And we all heard about, Asian carp coming up the river and things like that. Are these native carp, or are these invasive species? And, do they have any natural enemies? And then, sorry, I'm just kind of getting them all. And then the harvest, or whatever you call it, to remove them, is that something that needs to be done on an ongoing basis, or is that a kind of you hit it hard once and then you're good for a long time? How does that work, and what does that look like long term?
Right. So, Councilmember Striegel, to answer your question, these carp are not native. However, they're not the same Asian carp that are working their way up the river. There's a variety of them. So this is common carp. It was brought in from Europe maybe 100 years ago and spread purposely by humans throughout the system for, in Europe they're fed corn, they're raised for food, so there's a lot of sort of cultural, social reasons that they were brought over. They're not native to the area. They have no predators once they get beyond a certain size. There's a lot of favorable habitat in Minnesota for these types of fish, and they're very able in terms of reproduction. So with how fast they grow, with no natural predators, once they're in the system, they've really exploded. And it wasn't until the last 5 or 6 years with the pioneering research from the AAS Institute that there was really a sustainable management strategy. You could go in and harvest what you felt like were thousands and thousands of fish, and maybe you've only touched 2% of the population. So it's very important to know how many are in there, where do they go, and where are they reproducing, so that you can control reproduction. And once you can get a handle on reproduction, you can manage the adult population. So the strategy, it's large scale, it's system wide, but it's actually fairly simple. We know which wetland systems, by and large, these fish are going into to reproduce. They seem to do well in very certain conditions, which isn't, every year they're not reproducing. It might be once every 10 years when you're getting perhaps a winter kill that's knocking down the native fish that would otherwise predate the eggs. So one of the most simple things that we can do is, across a lot of these shallow marsh systems where they're going to reproduce, is put in aeration units and just keep the open water there all year round. It's a little bit capital intensive, but once those systems are in place, the operation and maintenance on that is essentially power. Once you have that under control, which is the first prong of the strategy, then you can go into winter seining or fishing, which is just knowing where they are in the winter and removing as many of the adults as possible. That's going to be fairly intense for a period of 3 to 7 years, and after that, your costs are going to taper off, but there is ongoing management and maintenance. We'll be seeking somewhere between $1 million to $1.5 million from Lessard Sam's Outdoor Heritage Council for what we think is going to be one of the largest fisheries management plans of this nature in the state. So we're pretty excited about the potential.
I assume that goes to more than just Lake Wasserman.
Correct. That's going to go systems wide. And so there'll be aeration units that need to get installed, powered. Once those are in place for a year or two, and concurrent with that, we'll be doing the winter seining. Concurrent with that, we'll be identifying wetland restorations around the landscape that we can be pursuing.
So is the aeration just part of the harvesting process, or is that a permanent solution?
The aeration keeps the water open so that your bluegills or other fish will eat the eggs that would otherwise, overwinter, hatch because there was no predation.
So is there any downside to, obviously we're interfering with the current ecology, whatever it is there any downside to it?
There's really actually minimal downside, and in terms of return on investment, it's quite economical compared to a lot of the other habitat restoration initiatives that are out there that require you to buy land and heavy on the construction and long-term maintenance. So,
how large of an area are you talking when you're aerating?
I'm not the technical expert. It's not, you wouldn't have to keep the whole area open. You're just looking to keep enough of the ice out so that you're not getting a complete freeze down.
Other questions? Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Ben.
All right, so while James intended to not give all the reasons why maybe this is a good opportunity for the city, I think he hit a lot of them on the head. Certainly our concept that we've reviewed before is just that. It's a concept at this point, and what we've talked about the last couple of meetings is really whether the council believed this would be in the best interest of the city to secure the property so that we could, in the future, build out a concept maybe like this, maybe slightly different. And what I'll go through tonight, we'll start with kind of the funding, because that's where we left the conversation last time, and then we'll go into the meat of the details on the agreement itself, but also give you a little bit of background of what happens after the agreement that I think is important to understand just with the agreement itself. But to highlight the project, just on the surface for the city, as James had a great graphic in his presentation talking about the planning approach and had a couple different layers involved in that graphic. What I think is important for the council to consider, that I think the community has already started to respond to, that they understand, is for the city, this isn't just a park project. It's also not just a natural resource project. There's a number of objectives, and they're countless. We could probably go through our comp plan and other strategic objectives that the city, this council, previous councils, and residents have looked for, that this kind of checks a big box for a number of those different areas. So if you have questions about the concept itself, happy to come back to that, but we can kind of get into the weeds a little bit on the numbers here. The only thing I want to highlight before I go there is in terms of this hasn't been scheduled as a public hearing, but we do have representatives that live around Wasserman Lake. Council's previously been given a letter of support from those residents, identifying their desire to see this type of project move forward. They've also on their own identified the number of objectives that could be solidified through this. Park and Rec did review the concept, and in understanding not only, again, not just the park aspect of what this partnership and project looks like, but also the water quality benefits that the city could leverage in furthering this partnership and kind of memorializing it in an agreement and a specific partnership for this property. They did recommend approval on March 20th that the council move forward with this and continue to explore funding and financing options to realize the park and improve water quality. So in terms of numbers, there's a lot of words in the agreement before you tonight, but just kind of the brass tacks of what the proposal before you tonight is. City staff has worked with the district to identify of the $875,000 that they have as a purchase agreement, what that final dollar amount would be for the city to acquire back that property after they've gotten it from the current property owner. $850,000 is the dollar amount that we're using in the agreement. That is where staff feels is a good benefit. If we just broke away from thinking about what this agreement itself is and just focused on what would benefit the city in terms of looking at property acquisition, $850,000 for how the city has looked at parkland dedication previously is a very reasonable price. We have an adopted fee schedule that if a developer is coming in and going to pay a fee in lieu of actually providing land, we have an adoption of $100,000 an acre. Tonight we're looking at roughly 12.5 to 13 acres of usable upland that can be for the park, and that doesn't include the ability of working with the district of going across some wetland areas through boardwalks that can serve as public access out to the lake. So on a per acre basis, we're well below even our adopted fee schedule. So to James's point, if the current property owner is viewing the long-term use of this land being for public purpose and can realize some kind of tax benefit by selling less than market for this public purpose, that's obviously an advantage to the city. What we've done, again, as we've talked about before, is look at this from a long-term perspective financially and not wanting to jeopardize the day-to-day consumer or resident of just overburdening ourselves and trying to put this on the taxpayers and impacting annual taxes. So what our finance director looked at is basically coming up with dollars on hand that don't impact our current financial obligations, that at least gets us one step closer to acquiring the property. So as proposed in the agreement, we would take the city would take a loan from our long-term street maintenance program with the intent to pay that back through land sale of 13.5 acres when that does happen in the future. In the meantime, until that does occur, the city can fulfill all of its obligations for street maintenance programs through our CIP program. So we're okay with a long-term objective of repaying that initial loan. The other thing that we've done in this agreement is take the remaining $425,000 and use the offered financing through the district to pay back the district over a 5-year period of time. So before you see equal payments for the first 4 years of $42,500 and a balloon payment at the end. Again, because this was an unbudgeted priority and basically a short window of opportunity to secure the ability to acquire the property, you're trying to make the initial payments lower. And it would be our intent from staff's perspective that through the 2018 budgeting process, we would identify how to make those initial payments, again with the intent overall for even that other half to be repaid into the appropriate funds or balances through the sale of the 13.5 acre property. Over that 5-year period of time, we also have a 0.5% interest rate, which if you're doing the math is a little over $8,000 to basically have a loan from the district over 5 years.
So I hate to get things out of order, but the next item for discussion is the 13.5 acres. Shouldn't we get an update on that before we talk about this?
All I can tell you is our update won't include a purchase agreement. It'll be more of an update on where we are with discussions related to that concept.
The discussions are continuing.
They are continuing.
Positive.
They are positive.
Okay.
The only thing that I'd say, again, what we're trying to do without jeopardizing other obligations of the city financially is to come forward with a solution for the council to consider tonight that doesn't jeopardize those, uses real dollars on hand, and puts the city in a good financial position to secure this, we'll call it once in a lifetime opportunity to secure property on Wasserman.
So I agree it's a great opportunity, but what happens if that 13.5 acre sale doesn't come through? What's our contingency?
Yeah. At some point in time, we will sell that. Will it be in the 5 years that we have under this obligation? It may not. I would say the discussions that we're having look favorable, that it would probably be sooner than that. But again, looking at money on hand, what our current financial obligations are, this plan helps deliver securing this property, and there will come some point in time where we do have sale of 13.5 acres.
If that doesn't happen within the next 5 years, what do we do? What are our options?
We will have the ability, obviously, over 5 years to realize what our current 5-year CIP program is and even plan out to pull this funding either through development that occurs around this property, through parkland dedication funds like we normally would. There's a lot of other contingencies that can be built in, but right now, the financial proposal in front of you for your consideration tonight at least allows us to have the opportunity to still talk about developing a park on Wasserman.
So generically, yes. I mean, for all the reasons we've talked about, and to Jim's point, you know, there wasn't more than a couple of years ago that we looked at that 13.5 acres as potentially a contribution to a developer to induce development. So no cash trading hands. Hopefully we've moved for a long time away from that kind of an environment. But just in the event, right, so debt service on $850,000, probably somewhere around $5,000 a month, $60,000 a year. So, you know, what would you do, or where would we go to get an extra $60,000 a year?
So we did run a model where the half payment, the $425,000, could be bonded for and basically paid for by the city over a 5-year period of time. Over that period of time, it did increase the overall annual rate that the median home value would see, but it was relatively negligible for that period of time. But what we've heard in previous conversations with the council about this particular project is that there was a desire to come up with a method of payment that didn't burden the taxpayer beyond what we already have kind of in the queue over the next 5 years.
But this isn't an $850,000 project. That just gets us the land.
Correct. So we do have the ability through additional partnerships with the Watershed District to secure grant opportunities either in partnership directly with them on co-applying, having them lead application efforts, and then there are also funding opportunities through the state that this project would actually, as a park, fall very well in alignment with a lot of the state objectives for looking for park development.
Would it make sense, and I understand you're not the money guy, but just as you're standing there, so I'm going to ask, does it make sense at all as we think about, you know, kind of a hedge against the, you know, worst case scenario to, until that land sells, take a little piece, dedicate a little piece of park dedication from everything that happens from here until that time, to basically bank that as a way to build ourselves a reserve to take care of this? Because it wasn't just about this project that this council, and for the almost 6.5 years that I've been on it, said we don't want to raise tax rates. We've been trying to lower rates, and we've made some pretty good headway. And I don't think that's, you know, unique to this project. So it's, in general, we never want to raise tax rates. So that too is a slippery slope. So I would say that needs to be kind of a backstop, is where do we come up with the money in the absence of things going the way we want them to, or we hope they will.
Yep. And I think through this 2018 budgeting cycle, we can certainly have that more in-depth dialogue with the council about other sources that could help pay for that park acquisition. Any other questions on funding?
Just one quick question, and that is there a timeline in terms of the build-out of the park that we would be committing to as part of this project, that we would be needing to spend additional money?
There's no obligation in this agreement or future agreements that we'd be obligated to do X level of improvements of building out the park.
Okay, thank you.
The plan right now, my understanding, the plan right now is any of the park improvements, assuming the council moves forward, the improvements themselves would be done via grant process, correct?
Some of them, yes. But I think depending on what that ultimate plan for the park is, there may be a combination of grant dollars that are leveraged as well as future capital improvements programming for parks beyond where we currently are through 2021.
Okay, I was under the impression that most of that would be done through a grant process. Whenever we would be able to get grants, we'd do a piece and continue that.
I think that's certainly one method of approach, but we need to figure out what we want to build first.
Got it, thank you.
Grants generally have some specific boundaries and purposes.
They do. And there's usually some level of contribution that the local jurisdiction is putting forward as well, depending on the grant application. Sometimes it's land, sometimes it's additional cash, and then there's percentages. So those are things that, as we identify what that final plan is that the city's trying to realize, what the best grant opportunities are. In some cases, it might satisfy a huge amount of that. And in other cases, we maybe just be looking at other developments that come in that we aren't certain about today that happen around this park, where we have those dollars to put towards a park in close proximity to that new development.
But if we purchase the land, any of the improvements, we're not tied in to any specific commitments. It would all have to go through and be evaluated, platted, funded.
It would go through our typical process for park improvement. So even anytime we take land through development, there's a sequencing of events of trying to gear up the funding to help improve that land beyond just getting it.
Got it, thank you.
Just to be clear, we're, for lack of a better term, kind of making a bet here. Because we don't fully have the funds to build out the park yet. We have a great vision. In reality, we don't have the budgeted funds to buy the park. We're finding the funds to buy the park or to buy the land. And going forward with the best intent to build out a park along the lines of what has been identified here. Just in being transparent.
Correct.
This isn't locked in, but this is the bet that we're considering.
Yeah, and I think it's very clear even in our 2030 comprehensive plan, the city said they wanted a waterfront park. We even said in the document, don't know where this is, but it should be of high priority. We're presented with the opportunity that you have before you tonight, so this is the financial solution that gets us there.
I will make a motion, and I will combine these to authorize execution of a cooperative agreement between the City of Victoria and the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District as drafted related to the acquisition of property on the west side of Wasserman Lake for the intent of developing a waterfront park to be owned by the City of Victoria on Wasserman Lake and improving natural resources, including water quality within the property that will impact improved water quality on the lake. That's Part A. Part B, we also further authorize the execution of a purchase agreement in a form substantially consistent with the letter of intent to purchase the property from the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District at a price of $850,000, paid over a 5-year time frame as outlined in the letter of intent, subject to final review by the City Attorney.
Second.
Just further discussion. Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I'm not.
That's right, we have a valid.
I thought we were going to have a full discussion, but anyways, just I think this is one of those rare opportunities that we as a community have an opportunity to build something pretty special here. This is not only going to be enjoyed by us here today, but it's going to be enjoyed and appreciated for generations to come. I also think that by forming this alliance and this partnership with the Watershed District, I think it's going to send a strong message to the Watershed District that we're serious about taking care of our water. And this is a lake that needs to be cleaned up, and I think by putting that money on the table, I think in talking with staff, I think it's going to accelerate that cleanup process, and I think it's going to be beneficial in a whole lot of ways. And I know Kelly's identified a plan to go forward without having to raise taxes, and I think as time goes on, we'll have an opportunity to move some funds around and make this a really workable project.
I just think that there's huge benefit for the city here, not only the water quality, but the park and the funding we can get worked out, even though this is coming on us at short notice. Any other comments from the council?
Mayor, if I may just comment, I just want to acknowledge that I have worked with the the Watershed District attorneys. They've had a couple of very good, helpful attorneys on this. And so you have two documents really in front of you, a cooperative agreement, and then attached to that a letter of intent. The letter of intent sends out terms of a purchase agreement. So it's a fairly multi-layered transaction that we're talking about doing here. That's been worked through by me and by the attorneys for the district. So just put that on the record.
All right, thank you.
Go
ahead.
I'm not sure anybody, or maybe everybody, realizes kind of the magnitude of this. Over the last 4 years under the leadership of Mayor O'Connor, there was a concerted effort to build a very constructive relationship between Minnehaha Creek Watershed District and various other external agencies that we interface with. They weren't always collaborative and cooperative. There was a lot of conflict. And so, a year ago when the previous council signed this joint, or made this joint powers agreement to move forward and do these kind of collaborative projects, that was a pretty noteworthy event. And so for me, this is kind of okay, great. That was an agreement in concept, but now this is it actually becoming concrete and becoming real and doing something that really has value to not just Victoria, but the entire watershed. It's almost the headwaters, and if you're a Lake Minnetonka boater, or if you realize Lake Minnetonka goes down Minnehaha Creek and eventually ends up in all of our other lake rivers to the Gulf of Mexico, this is not a trivial matter. It's a very important thing, and I think just from that benefit, it's worth our effort.
Any other comments?
Point noting, I think we have council received nearly 30 emails in support of this project. So people have been involved and have let us know that this is something they support. So.
Okay, we have a valid motion and a valid second on the table. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. Motion passes 4-0.
Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to say thank you to council and staff and the public for all your, and especially council for your help and leadership, and we look forward to many more years of fruitful partnership together. Thank you.
Likewise.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, update on the comp plan process. A verbal update. Ben, is this you?
It is me. I'll be rather brief unless the council has questions. Just haven't talked about the process at all since we kind of kicked off, but the council did put together a steering committee for this process. We do have a lot of their work available to the public on our website. We have a steering committee page, so any of the meetings, agendas, minutes, any of the materials that group is looking at, we have available on our website. One of the things that's gotten quite a bit of traction is our social pinpoint map. So this is kind of our initial effort at trying to gather input from the community. A couple different ways that this tool can be used. So if you're just looking at what's been commented on most recently, you can kind of organize by tab and go through some of those comments. The nice part about this is it does allow someone to put an idea or a comment out there, and then people, similar to Facebook, can kind of like what or dislike what those comments say. Just having gone through the Wasserman Park project, you can see there's also been the start of some comments about that proposal, just as an example. Certainly around downtown, you talk about the 13.5 acres and other things that are happening downtown. A lot of the purple pins that are around there are talking about desire for grocery store, good things happening on the 13.5 acre concept. It's actually pretty fascinating. We've had probably the most hits that anyone using Social Pinpoint has had this early in the process. So I think we launched this map probably right at the beginning of March. And I think we've already had over 500 original visits to the site, and they're actually staying on the site for quite a long period of time. Our consultant, Hoysen & Kogler, used this previously on a park and recreation open space master plan in Chanhassen that did not get near the traction over the course of time that they had this. So it has been, I think, very well received. We get a lot of comments about even development proposals that are happening today. People get in and make comments about concerns they have or things to think about. So it's been a really worthwhile tool. On the back end, we'll be able to kind of extrapolate all the data for what types of individuals are commenting on what. And then as we get further into the comprehensive planning process and we have concepts, particularly for some of those growth areas identified, we'll remove these comments, kind of suspend them, memorialize them as having taken place, but then we'll be able to overlay development proposals and solicit community feedback that way as well. Aside from that, we are in the beginning stages. Next week, staff and our consultant will be meeting with property owners within the 2 growth areas. So the area south of Marsh Lake Road down to County Road 10. We will meet with those folks as well as the people kind of to the west of Lake Bridge and Rhapsody. Those 2 growth areas that were reviewed and approved by the council to get a little bit more detailed analysis going through this 2040 comprehensive plan process, and we'll continue to update information on the main page of our comprehensive plan as well as the committee page. And lastly, at the last steering committee meeting of all the things that the group has started to learn and educate themselves about, well, we did have a discussion about branding this effort. And after a lot of creative discussion, the group, instead of just referring to this as the 2040 Comprehensive Plan update, is looking at recommending the brand of Our Victoria Tomorrow. So you'll start to see things coming out from us with kind of that slogan, and we hope that it solicits just more interest in the process and helps people get engaged. And with that, happy to take any questions the council may have.
Council questions? Hearing none. Ben, update on the proposed development? I assume this is you?
Sure, unless someone else wants to jump in. I feel like I'm talking a lot. We did have 2 council members, Councilmember Gregory and Councilmember Vogt, did go out and meet with Tim Nichols on site at his new project in Glen Lake, just to kind of get a look and feel of what the cooperative living opportunity might mean for Victoria. Still keeping engaged with him on a regular basis. Obviously, he's working hard on the grocery to get that to be solidified. But maybe, Councilmember Gregory, if you wanted to share some thoughts of kind of what you saw up close and in person.
Oh, just very impressed with the whole project, not only the project itself, but Mr. Nichols himself. The building was really special. Some of the amenities, the weight room, the workout room, it's huge. The gathering spaces could accommodate probably the whole building. The features in there, the kitchen was truly special. The rec room and pool table and all the bar. Just a really, really neat building. Really was impressed with it. But Mr. Nichols himself fielded questions for 2 hours from us, and I really appreciated it. He's been there, he's done that. He's been very successful. This model that he's putting forward with the co-op, he's been doing it for 30 years. So this isn't a new project for him. The scale of what he's looking at here in Victoria doesn't scare him away. We're looking at a $35-45 million project, and he doesn't even flinch at that. So I think it's the real deal, and I hope it keeps moving forward. And any letters of support for Mr. Nichols for a grocery store, I think, would be appreciated.
Other comments? Okay. Next item. Sketch plat for Hess or Hesse properly. Which is it?
Hess.
Hess.
So the council did review this sketch plat at the last meeting, and since then I know the council as well as myself, we've gotten quite a bit of feedback from the community, and likewise I think the developer left the meeting having a lot of discussion and just had a few more specific questions that he wanted to get answered. So I won't go through the kind of full review of what that proposal was from the last meeting, but just to kind of orient ourselves, we're dealing with the property directly south of Wasserman Lake, south of Wasserman Lake Woods, which this developer had previously done. So in concept, looking at trying to do something complementary to the development to the north and surrounding it, but also looking at a slightly different model and market for what they believe can be accomplished on this property. Just a close-up. One of the things we haven't talked at length with at the council level that the Planning Commission has spent quite a bit of time on is this identification that there are maybe different ways to accomplish single-family development in the city of Victoria. We've spent quite a bit of time with the Planning Commission identifying there's probably a place to see more of the executive or larger lot single-family take place in the community that's very consistent with what we all have seen in the past, but also recognizing in this effort for diversifying our housing base, a need to provide even those, whether it's first time or kind of entry level buyers, as well as people that are just looking for a slightly different lifestyle that don't want to maintain larger lots. What kind of framework should we have in place for those smaller lot single family? And I have a few examples of neighborhoods that we've seen in the past that are more of this smaller footprint, and I'll go through those here in a minute. But on the left-hand side, having not received the draft R2 regulations, because the Planning Commission was just starting to kind of solidify them as the concept was put together, you see kind of the breakdown or comparative table that this developer put together for what this project shows us in concept. So a lot of similarities. I think even though you're looking at some variation in lot size through their concept, just recognize that they hadn't been provided with kind of the baseline that the Planning Commission has been working on for expectations on these smaller lots. And again, they also developed and still own property to the north in Wasserman Lake Woods, and I believe have done a good job recognizing that in order for a smaller lot single family development to be successful here, they've done a good job of blending in lot sizes to be complementary where they're adjacent to other existing neighborhoods. So you kind of see same and same on the fringes of the development, and then go into more of this desired focus of seeing a smaller lot single family development. So a few examples, again, smaller lot sizes, you see them listed out on the left-hand side of the screen. Few caveats that I would point out for what we've seen in the past for smaller lots. A lot of them, even though maybe side yard setback wasn't the 8 feet that we've seen previously, in many cases where we've had smaller lot developments that are similar to all other aspects of what you've seen previously in that R2 comparative, they were looking at 2-car garage developments. So the majority of the homes, Savannah Valley, Katy Hills 9th, Field Creek, and Windtree Estates, all 2-car attached garages. So they weren't trying to have enough width to get a third stall onto those homes. And then lesser setbacks, you see a lot of similar names there with the addition of Cheval 17th. That, I would say, is a larger lot development, probably more consistent with what we've started drafting as our R1 district, but it did have a smaller side yard setback. In that circumstance was to be more comparative to the remainder of the development that is actually in the city of Chaska. So there were 3 questions that I know that, and the developer is here, Matt Pavick, who spoke to you all before. I had 3 specific questions that we're looking for some feedback on tonight. Matt, unless you have anything else that you wanted to give in terms of background on the concept, could certainly go into having just an open dialogue about those 3 questions.
Thanks, Ben. Mayor, Council, Matt Pavick, Civil Site Group. Just quickly, since our last meeting, we have been studying our plans a little bit tighter. We were able to change the side lot lines, side setbacks from 7.5 to 8 to kind of conform a little bit better to that R2 that's being worked on. So we have been working on that. We're just in the process of kind of fine-tuning, getting ready for preliminary plat submittal, which we're shooting for this week. So other than that, I don't really have any additional new information that you've already seen everything else, but I am here for any questions, or I definitely would like to kind of get some direction so we're not going the wrong direction.
So one of the concerns that I think was expressed pretty frequently by a number of the residents that are in that area was about traffic levels and traffic patterns. And I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to kind of the timeline of this relative to the other things that are happening in the area, the Lennar development, the Marsh Lake Road updates, some of those things that are all going to either contribute or alleviate traffic concerns?
Yes, I can. So I don't know if we can get a map of the kind of the region. So if you see our project that we're proposing is 80, right now it's 87 lots. We're planning on developing it in 2 phases, kind of a north phase and a south phase. So that the north half, we're looking at starting construction in the fall. There may be a model home in the fall. That would be the fall here of 2017. We understand that the roadway connection that would lead to the east towards the school is hopefully going to be completed here also in the fall of 17. So at that point in time, that east-west connection will be open. Our project won't really have any traffic yet at that point. Over the next 6 months, they'll be starting to build homes. We'll be doing, I would bet, 10 to 15 homes will probably be built in 2018. 2019 will open up the second phase, which it takes again a year or two to build all the homes. Another timing element would be the improvement of Marsh Lake Road, which we understand could happen in 2019. So that kind of lines up with the completion of our second phase. Another connection to Marsh Lake Road would be when Lennar moves forward with their next couple of phases. And based on, and I don't want to speak for them, but just based on the way that they've been selling and their current timing, they're proposing the 10th edition now. I would expect over the next 2 to 3 years, they would complete their phases that would lead out to the south, which would create another connection to Marsh Lake Road. And then we also, in working with Jeremy Rock, who owns the property just to our south, where ultimately our street would connect, and it would be obviously preferred to connect to a finished Marsh Lake Road rather than the current gravel road for a few reasons. And the main one is engineering, because you're going to have different elevations, horizontal alignments to be difficult to connect it physically with a road now. It makes a lot more sense to do it when you know what you're connecting to. So
in that specific instance, if somehow that connection happened before Marsh Lake, who owns the responsibility and therefore the bill for reconstructing any reconstruction that might be required when the new Marsh Lake Road alignment and elevations are constructed?
So I'm going to defer to Kara, but typically, if we were to build a road now, after development, that road would be then dedicated to the city, in which case the city would then own the road, and if it were to have to be changed at that time, I believe that'd be a city expense, but
It would be incorporated into the overall project cost, so any sort of rework would be part of that total project, and of course would be our share under the cost participation policy with the county.
So clearly that connection that's planned for this fall, that may not happen. We're hoping it'll happen. And many residents were expressing concerns about the traffic and going through the neighborhood. I'm curious whether or not, and I'm not trying to add cost to your project, but if we had a gravel road along that Lot 7 that we talked about a couple of meetings ago, to do 2 things really. To give all of the construction traffic, because before homes and people actually start moving in, if we did that along that Lot 7 next to the park, I'm assuming some of that could be reused as far as the actual road to the park, but at the same time, it would give us more time if that one connector road is delayed, and it would take the traffic off the neighborhood streets to the north and west. Is that a possibility?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I meant to bring that up. We have been considering that, and yes, we are agreeable to that. We'd have to work with staff to figure out the best way to make that temporary road, but yes, we think that's a great idea. At a minimum, it'll serve to provide for as the developer, all of our construction traffic for the initial construction and the grading and the huge trucks, and then throughout the home construction, we got to figure out how much of that road can be used in year round and that sort of thing. But definitely at the beginning stages for the big heavy construction, we'll definitely access it from
Marsh Lake Road.
And that way, when Marsh Lake does come in, which 2019, there's not a lot of work that we would have to tear up depending on where that road ends up, right?
Correct.
All right, thank you. Ben, did you have other points you wanted to go over?
Yeah, so a few things just to make sure that the council understands and communicates back to the developer. With this being set up where we're creating kind of same as same around the edges to be comparable to people that have already invested into a neighborhood, into a certain type of lot type, I think the developer's done a good job of creating that. But because this is, in terms of recent projects, probably the first that we're looking at a slightly different type of single-family home that would be going into a neighborhood, just wanting to make sure that, one, the council understands that it's not going to be completely a contrast to the other neighborhoods surrounding it, but that is a little bit different. Again, I know the Planning Commission has spent quite a bit of time trying to understand what's the right fit for Victoria in this smaller single-family footprint, but would certainly like to get some feedback, I think, on where this project is headed. So again, to Mr. Pavick's point, when they come in with preliminary plat, that they're not surprised that maybe expectations that the city had aren't being fulfilled in what their proposal is.
Council?
Not so much for the developer, but just in general, this land bridge that everyone's talking about and what's going to be done in fall. What happens if it doesn't get done? Is there opportunity to put four-way stops on the Wood Drive? Wood Drive's got two connections to Lakeside. Has that been discussed at all?
Sure. So I could provide an update on the process associated with the road surcharge for constructing the rest of Lakeside Drive. I think it's interesting to segue back to the discussion that was occurring with the Watershed District, because that whole Lennar Wetland Restoration joint project that is occurring with Lennar and Minnehaha Creek on the Hess wetland was the result of this road needing to get constructed through a wetland. So Lennar is impacting a wetland in order to make our roadway connection that caused them to need to do some wetland mitigation. That's now occurring on the Hess property that's part of this development. So they're all very interconnected. But that was a very challenging regulatory framework for Lennar to work through to get the permitting necessary to get that construction in place. As part of the design, there was a lot of review for what was the best method to construct that roadway through there. In its worst areas, there's 30 feet of not acceptable road support material at its worst point. So it wasn't practical to try to excavate 30 feet of poor soils within a wetland. So this surcharge technique was recommended by the geotechnical engineer and accepted by the city as being an appropriate way to build the road. The problem is it's really annoying from a resident's perspective, because a lot of the time you're seeing nothing happen. So what first occurred was the installation of measuring equipment to measure settlement that's occurring in the area, as well as poor water pressure for the soils beneath the surcharge that's installed. So over time, 6 different lifts of material have been placed on top of those poor soils with the purpose of consolidating them to the point that they stop moving. So each lift is placed, measurements are taken, time passes, and then the geotechnical engineer recommends, okay, we can put another lift on. So that application of the surcharge occurred all the way through the beginning of March, I think it was, and now we're in the 6-month waiting period, which is the part that's particularly excruciating for everybody in the area, because nothing's happening as far as the eye can see. But in reality, all sorts of exciting settlement and stabilization of poor water pressure is occurring. Braun does take measurements every other week. Those measurements get reported, and they're monitoring it. Generally, though, the framework we're expecting is for it to be in its current condition for about 6 months, plus or minus. Lennar would happily build the road sooner, so if an opportunity presents itself where the geotechnical engineer is recommending that it's not going to settle any great amount further that we could start removing the surcharge, we would. The thing that's important for the city, though, is at the end of the day, this is our road. So we want to make sure that the soils are consolidated as much as possible. So I keep reminding the community development director and the developer and everybody else that it's our job to try to end up with the best road for the taxpayers in the long run. We don't want to have our own little Highway 5 that settles every year that we just keep adding more asphalt to for 25 years like we used to do before the road was rebuilt. So I've been refusing, I guess, is the correct word, to give anybody a real timeline because I want to manage expectations that I'm not going to authorize them to proceed with removal of the surcharge and building the road until I think we're in a pretty good position. We should expect that that road will settle over time. It is a road built in a wetland, but we want to have the best circumstances that we can for ourselves over time. So, best case scenario, surcharge comes off early fall. It'll take maybe a month to get the road built and the curb get in and get it paved. But certainly we all want to see it open as fast as possible so we can distribute traffic and get kids to the school efficiently. In regards to the speed complaints we've been getting, we have done some monitoring with our flashing speed limit sign, and that data isn't really indicating to us that people are traveling above the speed limit when the sign is up. I am giving some thought to doing some additional speed studies that would be a little bit more formal, that don't have the flashing sign, because I do think that does cause cars to drive slower when they're seeing that they're speeding. It does work. The city does have a stop sign policy that states very clearly that stop signs aren't to be used for speed control. Which is really the questions that have been raised thus far that have been brought to my attention. I have provided that stop sign warrant policy to those who've asked me about it, but that's certainly something that we're going to continue to look at and need to monitor as traffic increases and more houses get built in this area.
I assume on the stop sign you're referring to that four-way intersection of Lakeside and whatever that connecting road is that goes out to Marsh
Woods
Lake.
Drive?
I've gotten requests for every one of the intersections, not just the four-way, or what will be a four-way and then what will be an additional four-way. We've been talking on our end about pedestrian treatments that could be included in the scope of the new development. When this intersection comes through, we should be looking at installing a crosswalk with some additional signage. But I've gotten stop sign requests at this location and at this location.
So the reason I ask is, I look at a road like this and it's primarily serving the people who live there. I mean, there's probably a little bit of school traffic, but it's primarily going to be the neighbors. And I think they should get a much more significant say. I mean, yes, we have a guideline. That's fine. That's good. But I think they should get a much more significant say because it's not a major collector or some kind of a through street. And, it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? So you stop, that means you got to accelerate away. So there's kind of noise on both sides that maybe hasn't been completely thought through. But I guess I wouldn't just wave it off automatically because it's outside of our guidelines and standard process.
The policy does include provisions for installing stop signs in these type of circumstances, which provides for neighbors an opportunity to petition for stop signs. I will just note that from an engineering perspective, stop signs are used to establish who has the right-of-way at an intersection, not to control speeds. But the results of that analysis would, of course, be brought forth to the council, and then the council would have an opportunity to decide what the council wants to do. But there is a local petition process included in the policy that residents could contemplate.
Can we get that communicated to the HOA and let them know, so if they want to drive that, they can come back and say, hey, we want stop signs?
And then just by way of, I guess, confirming what I think I recall is, even though we are allowing some wetland impact by connecting Lakeside Drive here, I think the original concept of Lennar, just immediately north of there, that Sorrel Court originally connected through up to Carriage, and that was a wetland there that was going to have to be impacted, and that has been removed. There's now cul-de-sacs that terminate on each side of that so as to leave the wetland intact.
That's correct. There is a trail connection via boardwalk proposed through that location, but not a roadway impact to minimize the overall wetland impacts of the project.
One question on the measurement. Have the measurements for that one segment that you're waiting to settle, have measurements, are they indicating that settlement has slowed or stopped?
I spoke with the person at Lennar who's in direct contact with Braun, and they're expecting to get an update in the next couple of days. At last report, it's still settling significantly, but I don't know the amount off the top of my head, and what's significant to a geotechnical engineer may not be significant to the general public.
Well, and maybe more importantly is how does it compare to the model in terms
Right.
of what was expected?
Correct.
So Highway 5, if I recall, just down there in front of High Five Liquors and the subway there, was that, when that was reconstructed, that was a surcharge process there as well, same process as you're referring to here, I believe.
Ultimately, that road was actually built on geofoam, so we're floating the surface of the road over the poor soils in that condition. So there were these big giant foam blocks that are actually underneath the road surface that allows it to move.
How is that performing in terms of the road surface, longevity, et cetera?
I drive it frequently. So far, so good.
It's been 3 years?
2012.
Wow, time flies. Is that something that,
That road did have a surcharge, though, too, on it before they put the blocks in, because that's partially why it was closed for so long.
that was my
I
recollection.
blocked that from my mind for a minute.
Thank you.
Ben, Kara, other points?
So in terms of the project, still looking for some feedback about the types of lots being proposed and the development pattern itself.
Council?
I guess I would ask the mayor, I'm concerned about the side yard setbacks at 7.5 feet. That's something you wouldn't allow in your neighborhood.
No, that's not true, but I don't have a problem with the setbacks, and I heard that they're going to 8 feet. As long as the surrounding areas, and I think we talked about this last council meeting, so that across the street, the other neighborhoods aren't impacted by what you're doing. I think the other significant difference here is for somebody to come in and look at your layout, you're telling them up front, this is what it's going to be, so they know what they're buying into. What happened in my particular neighborhood is we bought into a certain amount of setback, and then the developer later came back and changed that. The planning commission voted unanimously against it, and at that time, the council overruled the planning commission and approved the changes against the residents' objections. That's a different scenario than what we're talking about here.
It's also incorrect.
All right, well, let's stay on target here. As far as this development, I don't have a problem with it.
It should be accurate.
I don't have a problem, Ben, with what is being proposed here, because people that come in and buy homes here are going to know exactly the layout. And because of that, there's no question about where the the setbacks are going to be, and there's not going to be any changes. So I don't have an issue with this. Council, other
I
comments?
just have difficulty with your selective memory.
There were comments, just to try to stay on topic, from some residents that were concerned about dollar figures. The developer had thrown out a dollar figure, and I think it was around $400,000 for a base price, and people were questioning that whether that's true or not with these types of size lots. But in speaking with the developer, that's just the reality. Lots are, even these smaller lots are still, we're talking $100,000 a lot. So the reality of trying to build a lower priced homes in these sides, in this size of a home, is really difficult. So if the developer wanted to speak to that a little bit.
Yes, I can speak about it a little bit. Generally, what we're trying to do here is not create a completely different price point, just a little bit lower price point. Just a little bit smaller yard, a little bit smaller side setback, little bit smaller building pad. We have an opportunity on probably about 20% of the lots. We're looking at 2-car garage size lots instead of 3. So, yes, that's an accurate statement. Thank you.
Other comments?
Some of the other issues related, or I guess questions related to that, and I see Mr. Rock is here as well, and that's the little cutout piece that contains the connection to Marsh Lake Road. And I guess just, to clarify the record, I think there was some debate back and forth at the last discussion about what your intentions are and what the timing is of that. And I don't know if you want to just kind of reiterate where your thoughts are.
Jeremy Rock, 5925 Marsh Lake Road. At the last city council meeting, someone had said that they had heard a rumor that we were never going to develop that 80-acre piece, and that is not the case. Although I can't commit to, I'm going to do it tomorrow. I can't afford to do that, but I'm not stupid, and I do see the long-term potential of that property to be developed. So I feel like that's something that, if we were to be asked for a guarantee of when we're going to do it, I don't think I could make any answer, but if we were going to develop that in sequence with the road being improved, Marsh Lake Road and things, that would be maybe a 3 to 5 year window to make that connection for those new homes. And it sounds like, based on what Mr. Pavick has said, that that's kind of in line with as they start to sell through and build on this development that's under discussion.
And just while I got you there, it looks from this, and I know this is just purely sketch conceptual, but in terms of adjacencies, everything you're comfortable, it's consistent with how you would see your land developing. So
I'm not a civil engineer or an expert, but it looks good to me.
I meant more like lot sizes, home styles, that kind of thing. And
my personal opinion is that the slightly smaller lot size makes sense for what's in demand. I'm also a realtor, and I do some development, one-off stuff in completely other places around the metro. And actually having a lot that is 60 feet wide is considered gigantic in some of the things that I do. And I feel like it's going to look normal, so it makes sense to me that even with that development filled out, for me developing in the future, I would think there would still be demand for that similar sized property, in that location and with that view of the wetland. So I like it.
Thank you.
Okay, comments on the question from the council?
How does this line up with draft?
Yeah, so kind of the importance that, I appreciated Matt reaching back out and say, hey, could we come and kind of clarify this specific question is also important for staff. So from a timing, we've talked about having draft ordinances prepared. We've actually gone out to notice having a public hearing on updating our residential zoning districts that would be come before the council at the next meeting. So we would be looking at taking the R2 in concert with kind of the other districts coming forward to Planning Commission at their next meeting, and then council would have potentially R2 adopted before this project would be back before you for preliminary plat consideration. So in terms of, do you generally understand and like what this proposal is, I think it's a good representative of what we've been looking at for what's this other type of single family that's going to be needed in the community, not just here on this property, but elsewhere in the community to try to diversify what we offer. So getting feedback specifically about those R2 regulations will be important to Mr. Pavick as well as to staff.
So I have to ask the question, why is this okay now, Mr. Mayor? When this came up previously, it led to everything that we're in right now. Why is it okay now versus previously?
Let's stay on topic. That
I am
happened
on
back in
topic.
12.
Why is this, if we're considering a lower side yard setback, a reduced side yard setback, I personally think it's good from a housing diversity standpoint. I want to understand, why is this different?
Because it's not the same thing. I explained what happened. So let's stay on topic here and answer the staff's questions.
We're discussing 8-foot side yard setbacks versus the 10 that we've been approved.
No, you're trying to refer back to what happened in my neighborhood back in 2012. That's not appropriate.
I do think setting a precedent and what that implies, in terms of other property owners is relevant. We've always concerned ourselves with where does this take us if we deviate in one area? What does that mean going forward?
Well, I'm not going to engage in this debate over the history. What I'm telling staff is I don't have an issue with what's being proposed here.
I would agree. I'm supportive of this plan. I think it's a good plan. I think it's a different product than what was built to the north end with the larger lots, the custom size. I think there's from an assessment standpoint, it's easy to point out if you want a more expensive neighborhood, okay, there it is to the north. This one is a little more affordable. It's just a different product.
I agree with Mr. Gregory's points wholeheartedly. I'm just trying to understand what caused the change.
I think the way you've transitioned, setting up the wider lots to interface with the existing homes, makes that a nice way to kind of guard against any excessive concerns of that area. It gives it a nice defined feel, and I think this is a way to make it possible for people to come into Victoria potentially for their first home or their move-up home and stay for a lifetime. So I think that's it's a nice project, very complementary to what we have.
And the last question that we had, we talked quite a bit about earlier with the Marsh Lake Road connection, just understanding the timing of how Mr. Rock's property maybe plays into understanding that phasing of what this project might be built out over 2 years. Council generally understands that may not all come at the same time, but may relatively come into the fold with kind of a second or future phase of this project.
And on that note, do you have any sense of when that Lennar 10th or whatever would make that additional connection southward to Marsh Lake, just east of this project?
I have probably as good of a gut check on it as what Mr. Pavick explained earlier. They've certainly had very good sales in the 9th, which kind of, from what I knew a year ago, has accelerated their desire to move forward with the 10th and have kind of those additional 44 lots available. Would not surprise me if sales stay the way that they are, that they'll be looking at what the 11th is and whether or not that gets down to Marsh Lake Road or something shortly after that in maybe a 3 or 5 year time frame probably makes a lot of sense. Because we are, in terms of looking at our geography of what we're bound in today, where the willing sellers are of land, they're probably in the best position to continue to march forward and provide kind of that larger lot or other single-family opportunities aside from this Hess property, what Mr. Rock owns, and maybe a few spot opportunities around that.
Thank you.
All right, Ben, Kara, anything further for the council on this? Do you want to bring up?
Do you need anything else?
You answered my questions. I really appreciate it.
Okay, council, any other final comments on this? Okay, let's move. Lori, report to the city manager.
Thank you, Mayor. There are a number of items included in the reports of the city manager. The first item I will probably defer to City Attorney Bob Vos on. There are a number of letters exchanged on the subject of requesting an Attorney General's opinion between Mr. Keldau and Mr. Vos.
Yeah, Mayor and Council, I won't do what I did the last meeting, take you through each letter, but here are the two, I think, points to update you about on correspondence that you have in the packet. The first is that as the two non-conflicted council members directed, we followed up with Mr. Keldau and his clients about requesting an AG opinion. That is now at least crafted in my mind, and so I think we're ready to sit down with the residents that have raised concerns about Lori's reimbursement of legal fees, defendant's legal fees in the case, and of course that's what the AG opinion would be asking about. So I expect that Lori and I are going to reach out to the residents and try and have a meeting with them about the form of that opinion request and the substance of it as we were directed to do. I would also just say, as an aside, I think we've kind of concluded that there are some other questions. One of Mr. Kildaw's letters that we talked about at the last meeting raised a request for a bunch of different kinds of data and documents. Sprinkled into those requests were, we think, questions about the way the city operates, not really data requests, but requests for an explanation about things. So I would hope to have that discussion with the residents at the same time that we talk about the AG request. And the other thing, I guess, that's just noteworthy is that Mr. Kildaw now has indicated that he won't be representing the citizens group in the event there is a legal action against the city or the city manager. Again, the thing that we talked about at the last meeting, he's indicating now that he won't be representing that group of folks. I'm not sure what they would do to use different counsel or proceed a different way, but that is certainly noteworthy given the amount of time we spent talking about this at the last meeting. So that's kind of the quick update, and I'm happy to answer questions about those letters.
Council? Okay, Lori?
The second item included in the packet is that we have received letters of resignation from the Victoria for a Lifetime Committee. The majority of those letters are included in the packet that does represent every member of the committee. Committee Chair Paul Asplin was not able to be here tonight to represent those letters to you. I could certainly ask him to come to a future meeting, but I would look at some point for some council discussion on how to proceed with that committee.
I'd just like to read two of the letters, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
This is from Stan, is it Hammersky?
Correct.
Effective immediately, please accept my resignation from the position of Vice Chair of Victoria for a Lifetime Committee. Obviously, I cannot through this instrument give complete reasons for this action. There are, however, certain points which I think are worth mentioning relevant to arriving at this regrettable decision. It is in my earnest thinking that there has developed between the mayor's office and those of us serving in various positions a major problem of communication, uncertainty, and lack of trust. Some further considerations which led to my decision are, first, the current culture clashing among elected leadership. Another consideration is witnessing the dogmatic policies and regulations embraced by the mayor's office. It is doubtful whether or not Victoria will retain its competitive edge in Carver County with this behavior. Because of these reasons and others, I believe my volunteering and involvement with providing affordable housing for our senior residents is no longer meaningful, and therefore terminate my continuation of volunteering for the city of Victoria. Sincerely. And then the second one, from Carol D'Elise, as I begin my second term with the Victoria for a Lifetime Committee, it is with great sadness that I submit my resignation effective immediately. This committee, under the leadership of Linda McNulty and Paul Asplin, has done great work in moving our city forward to seeking senior housing and the beginnings of training our businesses to be dementia-friendly. However, after attending the council meetings in January through April, it has become apparent the current mayor continues to have personal agendas at each meeting, all within an environment that is litigious and vindictive. Also within this same time frame, the mayor has not attended any of our meetings or shown interest in the VFLT or subcommittee in training the businesses. Our previous mayor attended a majority of our meetings. In light of what I have witnessed and personally experienced in this hostile environment, I had come to the decision to resign. I will miss working with this dedicated group of folks and look forward to the day that I can once again serve our fine city when safety, trust, and collaboration prevails. Just my own personal comment, I read these with great sadness. There are letters from every one of the committee members here, and they are very similar. I am tired of talking about this stuff with the mayor, and yes, I did bring up a couple questions tonight, but it's time that we move on. It's time that we focus on the agenda of the city, the objectives of the city, and to the extent that we have the mayor and his litigants continuing to get up and have and talk about letters that we have to respond to, that we have legal proceedings and threats of lawsuits that are continued by the mayor and his group, this will not end. And you can sit and smile at me and all that, and you are driving this. We offered to end this. And I put it out there again. We offer to end it again, but you're continuing this process. How much time over the last 4 months have we wasted on this? 5-hour meetings, Mr. Mayor. half of which talking about litigation. When can we start focusing on the business of Victoria 100%? It's in your hands. It's up to you. I'm finished.
With respect to the letters that were written, personally, I was kind of disappointed. I've attended all the Victoria for Lifetime Committee meetings since I've been elected for the entire year. And part of the reasons I attended was because of my support for the CDA, Affordable Senior Housing. I think we're on the precipice of finally achieving that. And part of the reason I wanted to go to those meetings was to lobby not only just to have senior housing, but to have a really special senior housing that would include retail along with it. I didn't want to put a senior housing building on the far end of our 13 acres and leave it sit there. I wanted to incorporate some kind of retail component, in particular maybe a coffee shop or a cafe or a restaurant. So I went to those committee meetings and I was trying to lobby for support from that group, and I continued to lobby for it, and I enjoyed going to the meetings, so I continued to go to the meetings. I thought they were productive meetings. I thought they were doing good work. And when issues came up, for instance, one of the first meetings where we had some concerns about how we were setting up these committee meetings and whether we were going to record and those types of things. And there was a great deal of concern among that committee that they didn't want to be recorded. And I offered to meet with Chairman Aspelin over coffee. We did that. We talked. We had a good meeting. I thought it was productive. But again, I made myself available to that committee. And at no time did anybody ever express concern about being sued or those types of things. If there was issues with the council, with the mayor, I couldn't speak for the mayor, but I was there to answer any possible questions. And so I'm disappointed that those issues never came up during a meeting, and I never had an opportunity to discuss that with the members. So I would like to see if they'd reconsider, but as far as moving forward, I'm not even sure where we go from here. If we recruit new members or if we disband the committee, I don't even know.
Different time, different issues, I guess, or different concerns. I've never seen an entire committee. That's shameful. And I think the idea of just trying to reconstitute it or, beg them to come back, which would be to the city's benefit to have that happen, but without understanding or addressing the underlying issues, I think it's just doomed to, another go-round. And, also I've seen resignations in the last few weeks from Park and Rec, from planning, and again, in 6+ years, I can only remember one other resignation, and that was when Ken Goulart, when the lawsuit was finished, he quit the Planning Commission. So I just, it's impossible not to look at this and connect the dots, and I think it's the height of hypocrisy to listen to Mr. Gooby talk about the concerns of that committee and call them myths. How arrogant. And to sit there and watch you laugh at those letters as they're read and continuing now, that's not leadership. Not even close.
Okay, is your report done?
For this topic.
Okay, mayor's report. First off, let me talk, oh, by the way, Bob, did you have anything else?
I don't, Mayor, thank you.
Okay, thanks. On Friday morning, I met with Dick Holly from Zumbro Lake. He's the president of the HOA up there. He showed me, we walked around the high water mark. He asked if I would issue an emergency no wake zone for 3 days. After meeting with him and looking at how the water was, I agreed to do that, so that was done. I think you have some of the information related to that here. Changing topics, I want to establish so that everybody understands I was not involved with the legal fees discussion in those residents. I had recused myself along with my wife. And on the other issue, I think it's important to note that there's not one lawsuit. I am the lead plaintiff in one lawsuit. There are 2 lead plaintiffs with 2 other lawsuits, right? So there's multiple efforts here and multiple lawsuits. Unfortunately, whether we like it or not, the legal process takes a lot of time, and that process is in flight. And since it is in flight, I'm not going to have any further comments on those lawsuits. So that's it for me tonight. Can I have a motion for adjournment?
I only commented on the Victoria for a Lifetime. I don't think you
I'd
called
asked,
for
I
reports
did
from
call
any
for
other.
reports. You're out of order. The
No,
motion for
I
adjournment.
said for that topic. You never called for reports from the council members.
Point of order. Let him speak.
Fine, I'm not afraid of it. Go ahead.
I think you would welcome it. So a couple things, Lori. A couple meetings ago, we talked about conflict of interest, and I think there was kind of the idea, or kind of the framework of establishing some working rules that we would all try to abide going forward. And I think that I'd like to see a draft or something come forward in a future meeting to kind of codify or to make that policy more formal.
During the conflict of interest discussion, Bob Vos and I had suggested that we have perhaps an agreement or rules of decorum about how council members would approach each other if there was a perceived conflict of interest and how they would raise those in public. Is that what you're referring to?
Exactly, yes. And I think it kind of got...
In particular in mind, or?
No, well, just the proposal that was kind of roughly drafted, I think it kind of was left hanging. I don't know that it ever reached a kind of a decision or a motion of any kind. Is that correct?
Yeah, and the recommendation was, as we noted, legal conflicts of interest are quite rare, but perceived conflicts of interest happen all the time and have occupied a great deal of our time. And how would the council like to agree to handle those going forward?
Why do we need to change what we're doing right now? And that is when something comes up, we speak individually. It's our responsibility to speak with the attorney, which I have done on numerous occasions, to get clarifications and confirm everything is all right. Why can't other council members do that? And why are you laughing, Mr. Mayor?
I'm not laughing.
There are issues that come up sometimes that I don't even know if we have a conflict of interest, and if other council members think I may have one, point it out, and we'll discuss it.
And again, this is more just about, and again, the spirit, I believe, of the kind of the proposal that the city attorney and the city manager had drafted was really more about decorum and having a good constructive conversation rather than some public bloodletting and finger pointing, and just having an opportunity to have a discussion and really just agreeing to that as just a policy about how we.
All right, I'm going to stop this discussion at this point. Lori, we can put this on. This was not on the agenda, and we've started discussing this topic. It needs to be added to another council meeting so the public knows that it's going to be discussed.
That was my request. Exactly. Thank you for finishing that. Then I was looking at our internal legal fees over the last 3 months, which we have bills for, and I'm talking about Kennedy and Graven. And I'm getting concerned from a budget standpoint. And to be clear, this is not about the lawsuits or defense costs for council members or anybody else. This is internal city legal expense, and it looks to me like it's running for the first 3 months of this year that we have bills. It's 50% higher than it has been the average of the last 2 years, and almost all of that is driven by the lawsuits, but in a peripheral way. And so I guess my point in bringing this up is that it looks at the current run rate like we're going to need about an extra $35,000 this fiscal year, this calendar year, to continue to fund that. And so from a finance committee budget standpoint, I'd like to have that considered and see kind of how we manage that, or make some specific recommendations for where that money comes from. Do we have that on the next month or next 2 weeks, or however long do you think you need to pull something together?
You can do that.
Thank you. I think, again, the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District is, again, I think a really good story in terms of the collaboration and, you know, how we participate as a city in different organizations that are around us and our peers. And I know that Mayor O'Connor routinely attended meetings from ISD 112 and 276, the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District, the Carver County Leaders Meeting, the Eastern Carver County Trail Meeting, the monthly VBA coffee meetings, Victoria for a Lifetime Finance, and I think routinely spoke at HOAs and then also provided readouts to the council to let us know what was on other people's minds, both internally and externally. And I'm wondering if the mayor could comment on all the meetings that he's attended of those organizations in the first 5 months of his administration, and what topics of interest came up that the residents would like to know about.
Okay, are you done?
Is that so no?
Are you done with your report?
Well, that was a direct question.
Right. I'll answer that in my report. Are you done with your report?
Yep, that covers everything that I had.
So I'll add to my report. I've met with many organizations working on Marsh Lake Road, working on Rolling Acres Road, working on the Zumbra flooding issues, and working on with the Minnehaha Water Creek shed as far as what was going on with this Wasserman Park that we approved tonight. In addition to that, I'm meeting with a lot of property owners and business owners and developers on things that are going on in the city. And when I have something that's not already discussed in the council session, I'll be more than happy to share that. One final, it's my report. You're out of order. On the rest of my report,
I move we adjourn.
no, I'm going to finish my report. I do like the fact that a lot of residents have come in. Judy Black with the petition. I support that kind of activity. I clearly don't disagree, or I clearly don't agree with their positions. I'd like to. I kind of wonder whether or not they've read the judge's order or some of the other legal documents. But be that as it may, I'm not opposed to what they're doing. I think it's a healthy dialogue. It's a dialogue that I think has come to this city that was probably sorely needed. The change is hard. Transparency and putting transparency in place is hard. The people that resigned from the Victoria Lifetime Committee, that's the one committee that this council chose not to record, but yet they're taking care of city business. And I think every resident has a right to understand what goes on in these committees. While I'm disappointed that they chose not to serve, I understand their hesitation and I accept their resignations. I'm sure this council will take up that subject as to what are the next steps. In a number of the points raised in the letter I would disagree with, but I did meet with Councilmember Gregory every time after a meeting when he went and met and attended a Victoria for a Lifetime committee because there was no recordings, and he did debrief me on what was going on. And I do support the activities of what they were doing. I do support the senior housing. I think we should have senior housing with first floor retail on it. So hopefully we can continue, whether we disband the committee or we find other people that are not afraid. I would like to make one final point, and that is during the interview process for all of these committees, I asked a question repeatedly if anybody objected to being recorded if they were selected and put on a committee, and my recollection is not a single person objected to it. So that's all for the mayor's report. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
There is a motion on the floor, but I'm going to withdraw that. I'd just like to, at some point in the future, Mr. Mayor, I would like to understand your definition, the difference between transparency and oversight, because what we have here is not transparency. And with that, I put my motion back on the floor. I move we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned.
You are an extremely arrogant person, you know.
All right.
You guys need a signature.
Proof of attendance?
Yeah.
What class?
Holy Family? being here.
Be sure to report. Get to class.
Just a signature?